The first time I saw Kendra Bell's name attached to my house, I was standing in my own kitchen with a grocery list in one hand and a manila folder in the other, and my husband was in the backyard pretending to fix a gate that had not needed fixing in 6 months. It is strange what your body notices before your mind agrees to understand it. Not the whole page at first, just the wrongness of her name sitting there under a heading that had no business holding it. My address at the top, my parcel number beneath that, a draft note clipped behind a county form. We had not even discussed filing yet, something about proposed home office use and supporting occupancy details for a future application Owen had mentioned in passing 2 weeks earlier when he said he might start doing consulting work on the side. The category line was what made my hand go cold. Primary property owner Alyssa Morgan. Secondary on-site business contact Kendra Bell. I remember reading that line twice without breathing. The kitchen window over the sink still had the thin waviness old glass gets when it has been there longer than most of the people standing near it. Beyond it, the backyard looked washed in late afternoon gold. Owen had his back to the house, one hand on the cedar gate, the other holding a screwdriver he was barely using. He looked so ordinary from that angle that for half a second I honestly thought there had to be some explanation simple enough to be embarrassing. A carryover from work, a copied line from another file, a form someone used as a template and forgot to clean up. That is the humiliating part of these moments. Your first instinct is often not fear. It is loyalty. The house was never fancy. My grandmother Evelyn used to call it good bones and no vanity, which was her way of praising anything that held up without needing attention. Small brick place on a quiet street in Lexington. Narrow front porch. Hardwood floors that clicked in 2 places no matter how many times Owen promised he would get around to leveling them. Kitchen drawers that swelled in summer, the little brass hook by the pantry where my grandmother used to hang her keys, and the church raffle tickets she never won anything with. It was the first place that had ever been mine in a way nobody could revoke with a fight, a breakup, a missed payment, or a landlord's notice taped to the door. Even after I got married, some frightened part of me still loved the fact that the deed only carried my name, not because I wanted distance from Owen, because I had spent too much of my life learning how quickly ours could turn back into not yours, when money got thin or love got tired. I set the grocery list down and took the papers to the table, laying them flat beside the fruit bowl my grandmother had kept there when she was alive. The folder had been tucked under a stack of mail Owen brought in that morning, which meant either he had not noticed it was there or he had noticed and did not think I would understand what I was looking at. That second possibility came so fast I pushed it away before I even admitted it. I went to the back door and opened it. Owen, he looked up with that easy expression he had always worn well, like nothing in the world had ever required him to scramble emotionally before answering. Yeah, can you come inside a minute? He stuck the screwdriver in his back pocket and crossed the yard. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, I had already moved the page to the top of the stack so there would be no confusion about what I meant. He glanced at my face first, then at the paper in my hand, and something passed over his expression so quickly another person might have missed it. Recognition, then management. What's this? I asked. He took the page from me and looked down once. Oh, that. Just those 2 words. Not surprise, not confusion, not where did you find that. Just a smooth little landing, like he had already rehearsed the emotional weather for this conversation and decided I was supposed to follow him into it. It says Kendra Bell is an on-site business contact for my house. For a draft, Alyssa. His tone stayed light. A draft that never went anywhere. I watched his thumb settle over her last name for a second before he shifted the page. It was such a small thing, but suddenly every small thing felt loaded. Why is her name on it at all? He exhaled through his nose and leaned one hip against the counter. Because she needed a mailing contact for a side business question, and I was trying to help her think through some paperwork. That's it. I stared at him. Using my address. It was not submitted. That didn't answer me. He looked up then, and there it was, that careful, tired patience people use when they want credit for staying calm while you ask a perfectly reasonable question. I know it sounds weird when you say it like that. When I say it like what? Like it means something personal. He laid the paper down between us. You work around this stuff all day. You know how many forms get mocked up before anything real happens. It was a placeholder. Nothing was filed. Nothing changed. I was helping somebody with logistics, not moving her into your life. My life. Not our house, not our paperwork. My life, like I was the one adding drama to an otherwise neutral process. Kendra, I said. The same Kendra you told me meant nothing. He gave a faint shrug. She does mean nothing in the way you're implying. She had a problem. I offered advice. You're turning a rough draft into some kind of betrayal. That should have reassured me more than it did. On paper, the explanation almost worked. I knew as well as anyone that draft language got sloppy, that people reused old templates, that support documents floated around half-finished all the time. I also knew good paperwork reflected the assumptions of the person building it, and that line did not reflect sloppiness. It reflected placement. I hated the fact that I could feel myself splitting in two right there at my own kitchen table. One half of me wanted to be fair, wanted to be the woman who did not leap from one ugly detail to the ugliest possible conclusion. The other half could not stop circling the same fact. He had not looked surprised. He had looked prepared. He came toward me then, gentler now, like he had sensed I was close to hardening in a direction he did not want. "Alyssa." I did not answer. "You know I wouldn't do anything to threaten this house." This house. Not our marriage, not me. The house. That landed somewhere low and hard, though I could not yet have said why. He touched my elbow. "I think you're stressed. You've had a long week, and because you work in closings, everything probably looks bigger when you bring it home." It was such a clean sentence. Thoughtful on the surface, mild, reasonable, almost loving. And yet what it actually did was move the problem out of the paper and into me. I pulled my arm back, not dramatically, just enough for him to notice. "Okay," I said, because I did not know what else to say without sounding either foolish or hysterical, and I was trying very hard to be neither. He studied me for a moment, as if deciding whether the conversation had settled enough to leave alone. Then he picked up the screwdriver from the counter and said, "I'm going to finish the gate before it gets dark." After he went back outside, I stood at the sink and watched him through the wavy glass. The scene looked normal in that awful way normal things can look when they are already rotting underneath. I told myself to let it sit, to breathe, to not become the woman who blew up a marriage over a draft form that had never been filed. I was still trying to believe that version of myself an hour later when Owen went upstairs to shower, and his phone lit up on the table beside me. I did not grab it. I did not even mean to read the screen. It was face up and the message preview slid across before I could look away. "Kendra, if Alyssa asks again, just say I never used the address. It'll make things simpler." I do not know how long I sat there after that. Long enough for the kitchen clock to click through 2 full minutes. Long enough for the water in the kettle I'd forgotten on the stove to go from quiet heat to a thin, angry whistle. Just say I never used the address. Not if she gets weird. Not if she misunderstood. Again. Again meant there had already been a first version of this conversation somewhere I had not been fully included in. I turned off the stove and looked back down at the folder, at the neat county, heading at my own name printed where it belonged, and hers tucked beneath it like a trial arrangement, waiting to see whether it could pass. Then I heard the shower running upstairs and understood with a clarity so cold it almost felt clean that I was done trying to calm myself down before I had all the facts. Something was wrong, and worse than that, it had already been discussed. Something was wrong, and worse than that, it had already been discussed. I did not sleep much that night. Owen came to bed like everything between us still belonged in the category of manageable things. He smelled like soap and cedar from the backyard and slid in beside me with that careful quiet husbands use when they think silence itself should count as goodness. He did not touch me, which somehow felt worse than if he had. I lay on my side facing the window and watched the streetlight throw pale bars across the bedroom wall until morning started leaking gray through the curtains. At work the next day, I told myself I was only checking because I needed to rule out the ugliest version of the truth before it rooted too deep. That was the kindest lie I told myself all week. Our office sat in a low brick building off Main Street with bad coffee and decent people and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made every file look slightly more tired than it was. I had spent 2 years there learning how often danger arrived dressed as paperwork. People thought property trouble looked dramatic. Most of the time it looked boring. A name added where it should not be. A mailing address used too early. Draft language that assumed a future nobody had fully agreed to yet. I pulled up everything on our home address that I could access without crossing any lines. Public-facing notes. Saved drafts Owen had emailed himself and opened through the printer at home, then apparently forgot to fully clear. A scanned worksheet from a zoning information packet. 2 half-finished letters. Nothing illegal, nothing explosive. That was what made it so hard to breathe. Kendra's name did not appear once. It appeared in 3 separate places. On one draft, she was listed as a business contact. On another, there was language about anticipated shared access to front room workspace pending household transition. Household transition. I stared at that phrase until the letters stopped looking like English. On a 3rd page buried in a notes section, Owen had typed mail can temporarily route through residence while office lease issue resolves. The residence. My house reduced to a neutral logistical container, like the walls did not know my grandmother's voice, like the pantry did not still smell faintly of cinnamon in winter because she stored sticks in an old blue jar, like my name had not sat on that deed as the first stable fact of my adult life. I printed nothing, took no copies, I just wrote the phrases down in a small legal pad I kept tucked inside my tote and shut the browser before anyone could pass behind me. Denise noticed anyway. She had a way of noticing without making a person feel observed. Late 50s silver hair she wore clipped back at the nape of her neck, low heels, quiet voice. She had been doing title work longer than I had been alive and never wasted a word when a simple sentence would do. "You look pale," she said from my doorway around 11. "That you're normal pale or you're, I've seen something pale." I tried to smile, which only made her come in and close the door. "I just need you to tell me if I'm overreading something," I said. That was how I framed it. Not my husband is making room for another woman inside my house. Just a technical question. Just a professional perspective. I showed her the phrases I had written down, not the whole story behind them. She read them twice, then set the pad back on my desk. "If someone uses wording like this once," she said, "you can maybe call it sloppy. If they use it repeatedly, they are trying to establish a paper trail of legitimacy." The room went very still. For what? For connection. For presence. For future argument. She met my eyes. Not ownership. That's not what this is. But this is somebody getting comfortable on paper with the idea that a person belongs in relation to a property. My throat tightened. "So I'm not imagining that." "No," she paused. "You are not imagining that." Denise never dramatized anything. That was part of why the sentence hit so hard. If she had gasped or cursed or told me men were all the same, I could have dismissed part of it as personality. But Denise looked at me the way you look at weather turning sharp. Calm, certain, uninterested in theater. "Whatever this is," she added, "do not confront it until you know the full shape of it." I nodded like I was steadier than I felt. That night I tried again with Owen. Not emotionally. Not the first time. He was at the stove stirring pasta sauce, reading something on his phone between turns of the spoon. The kitchen smelled like basil and garlic, and the buttered rolls I had warmed because habits survive a marriage longer than trust sometimes does. I set my bag down and said as evenly as I could, "What is household transition?" He looked over his shoulder. "What?" The phrase. "On the zoning worksheet draft." His hand stopped moving for half a beat. Then the spoon resumed. "You went digging." It was such a clean pivot, I almost admired it. I looked at paperwork tied to my house. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh but not warm. "Alyssa, come on." "No. You come on." He turned off the burner and faced me, fully, sauce's spoon still in his hand, like he had been interrupted during some noble domestic act. "Nothing happened. Nothing was filed." "I told you that. That is not the same as nothing happened." He stared at me a second. Kendra was having an issue with her office lease and needed a temporary mailing solution while she sorted some stuff out. I was helping her think through options. "You found draft language." Draft language is not a betrayal. The mailing language said route through residence. It was an option on paper. And household transition. Now the irritation showed. Barely. Just enough to make me feel the temperature change. Because she was considering shifting the kind of work she does and needed to know whether a front room setup could ever make sense in a residential space. It was theoretical. My front room. "You are making this sound insane." I actually laughed then once because sometimes pain comes out sounding almost amused. "I'm making it sound exact." He set the spoon down too hard. "You know what, fine." She was in a bad spot. I was trying to help. "Sorry if I didn't submit my compassion for spousal review first." There it was. New version. Not harmless paperwork now, but generosity. If I stayed upset, I stopped being a wife asking a fair question and became a cold woman punishing a man for helping someone in trouble. I looked at him and felt something inside me bruise more deeply because part of me still wanted him to rescue this, to hear himself clearly and be ashamed enough to tell the truth before I had to drag it out piece by piece. Instead, he said quieter, "You've been under a lot of stress. I think you're locking on to this because it feels concrete." Concrete. Like my mind needed the dignity of material objects because it could not be trusted with emotional ones. I did not answer. I helped set the table. We ate in the same kitchen where my grandmother had once taught me how to crimp pie crust with the edge of my thumb. Owen talked about a contractor he knew who might be able to fix the back fence properly before summer. I nodded in the right places and wondered how long he had been practicing the skill of sounding respectable while standing on top of something rotten. 2 days later, Tessa called, not because she knew, because she is one of those women who can hear strain through a hello the way some people hear a wrong note in a hymn. "You okay?" she asked. I stood on the porch with my arms folded tight over myself. The evening had turned cool. Somebody down the street was mowing even though the light was going. "Depends what answer you want." She was quiet for a second. What did Owen do? That question settled something for me almost as much as anything she said after. I told her enough. Not every detail, just enough. When I finished, I heard her sigh, the kind that carried old history inside it. I hoped he'd grown out of that. Out of what? Out of needing an exit before he admits he's unhappy. Out of keeping one foot in the next thing while he's still standing in the current one. Her voice stayed level, which somehow made it crueler. He did versions of it in college, nothing this serious. But Owen hates feeling trapped by his own choices. When something gets complicated, he starts arranging soft landings. Soft landings. I looked back through the screen door at my kitchen table, at the folded dish towel beside the sink, at the ordinary little life I had been living inside, as if ordinariness itself meant safety. "You could have told me," I said. "I didn't think he'd do it in a marriage," she said quietly. "Not like this." After we hung up, I sat on the porch steps until the concrete cooled through my jeans. The air smelled like cut grass and damp earth, and the neighbor's dryer vent. Everything around me was so normal it felt almost hostile. I texted Kendra the next morning before I could overthink it. "We need to clear something up. Did Owen tell you that you could use my address?" She did not respond for 2 hours. By then, I'd already convinced myself she would not answer at all. Then my phone lit up. I never used it officially. "He said the house situation was complicated, and you were still figuring out what you wanted. He said maybe I could work out of the front room for a while later if things settled. I thought you knew more than you did." I read the message standing in the supply closet at work with a box of legal-size envelopes pressing into my shoulder blade. "You were still figuring out what you wanted. The front room, if things settled. It was all there in one neat, unbearable shape. Not just hidden contact, not just flirtation dressed as paperwork, a narrative, a future tense. My house spoken about as if it were flexible ground waiting for my life to loosen enough for another woman to step onto it." I typed nothing back. I just stood there with my phone in my hand and understood finally that this was not clerical sloppiness, and it was not kindness gone blurry, and it was not one stupid line on one stupid draft. It was rehearsal. And by the time I walked back to my desk, I was no longer trying to decide whether my marriage could still be explained. I was deciding how to make sure the truth had nowhere left to hide. I did it on a Thursday because Thursdays were the only nights Owen reliably came home before 7 and stayed there. No drinks with clients, no helping somebody from work, no last-minute hardware store run that somehow took 90 minutes. Just home. I left work early and stopped by the bank first. Not to do anything dramatic, just to move the house papers from the safe folder in my desk to the lockbox my grandmother had kept at Central Bank since before I was born. The original deed copy, the insurance binder, the handwritten letter she had left with the will, the one that said in her plain square print, "This house is a roof, not a favor. Stand up straight in it." I had not looked at that line in almost a year. By the time I got home, the kitchen had that late-day quiet I used to love. Thin gold light over the sink, the old clock over the pantry a minute slow, the fruit bowl at the center of the table. I set everything out in order anyway. The copied phrases I had written down, the screenshots of Kendra's message, the draft pages with the repeated language, a legal pad with dates and contradictions. Nothing flashy, nothing a stranger would find cinematic. Just enough paper to prove I had not imagined the architecture of my own erasure. I did not call Denise. I did text Tessa. "I'm talking to him tonight." She answered almost immediately. "Do not let him turn this into tone." That was exactly the kind of sentence a woman sends when she has known a man all her life. At 6:43, I heard Owen's car in the driveway. He came in through the side door carrying takeout from the Thai place on Richmond Road, smiling in that tired, decent way that probably looked trustworthy to almost everyone outside this house. Thought I'd save us from cooking. Then he saw the table. Not panic. Not yet. Just a slowing. "What's all this?" he asked. "Sit down." He set the bag on the counter. "Alyssa, sit down." There must have been something in my voice I had not used with him before, because he did. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat carefully, like the evening might still be negotiable if he moved gently enough. I stayed standing for a second, not on purpose. I think I needed the room to look the way it actually was before I trusted myself to speak inside it. Then I sat too. I know about the repeated draft language, I said. I know about the mail routing note. I know about the front room reference. I know what Kendra thinks you told her. He leaned back a little, exhaled and rubbed one hand over his mouth. You texted her. Yes, that was inappropriate. I almost smiled then, not because it was funny, but because the reflex was so perfect. Of all the available moral categories in the room, he had chosen mine first. No, I said. What was inappropriate was using my house as a soft launch plan for another woman and hoping I wouldn't know enough to track the language. He looked at the papers, not at me. You're making this bigger than it was. Then make it smaller, honestly. Silence. I slid the first page toward him. You told me Kendra's name on the Home Office draft was a placeholder. It was. I slid the second. Then why is there separate language about mail temporarily routing through the residence? She was having a lease issue. The third. Then why is there wording about anticipated shared access to front room workspace pending household transition? His jaw tightened. You don't know the context of that. Then tell me the context. He looked up at me then, and I could see him trying to choose the version of himself most likely to survive this. Calm husband, misunderstood helper, man unfairly accused by a wife who worked around paperwork and had started seeing ghosts in forms. It never became real, he said finally. That matters. I stared at him. That I said is not a context. That is a defense. He gave a short, frustrated shake of his head. Okay, fine. You want context. Kendra was in a mess. Her lease was unstable, her work setup was falling apart, and she needed options. I was trying to think through possibilities. For her. For someone who needed help. In my house. In a draft. In my house. He looked away. That was when I knew I'd already crossed the last bridge emotionally. Because I was no longer waiting for him to rescue what we had. I was watching to see how much truth he would force me to drag by the ankle. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. Kendra's text sat open in the message thread. He said the house situation was complicated and you were still figuring out what you wanted. He said maybe I could work out of the front room for a while later if things settled. He read it once, then again. His face did not collapse. Men like Owen rarely give you the courtesy of visible ruin. What changed instead was subtler, the slackening of rehearsed patience, the first sign that he understood interpretation was no longer the battlefield. Facts were. She misunderstood, he said. No. My voice stayed even. She understood what you told her. He leaned forward. Alyssa, listen to yourself. Nothing happened. That sentence is doing a lot of work for you. He stood, then paced once toward the sink, then turned back. I did not move her in. I did not file anything. I did not put her on ownership. I did not take your house. The word, your, landed between us like a dropped glass. Not our. Not even in defense. Your, and there it was at last, stripped down, clean enough to see he had always known exactly what this house was to me. Not just financially. Not just legally. Emotionally. He knew it was the first thing in my life that was not conditional, and he had still let himself experiment with making it conditional anyway. You're right, I said. You didn't take it. He looked almost relieved for half a second. Then I kept going. You just started acting like you had the right to imagine somebody else inside it. You started speaking about my home like it was flexible ground. You told one story to me and another story to her, and the overlap between them was my house. His face hardened. I was trying to keep things from blowing up. No, you were trying to keep options. That hit him. I saw it because it was true enough to offend him in exactly the right place. You want the ugliest version because it makes this easier, he said quietly. I laughed once, low and stunned. Easier, he opened his hands. I didn't know what was going to happen. With us. With anything. Things have been strained for months, Alyssa. You've been distant. Everything in this house has felt tense. There it was, the second confession buried inside the first. Not Kendra as an accident, Kendra as contingency. I felt something inside me go very still. So that was it, I said. You weren't choosing. You were preparing. He did not answer. You weren't leaving honestly, and you weren't staying honestly either. You were trying to keep me, keep the house, and keep her possibility all alive long enough to see which version of your life felt easiest. That is not fair. No, I said. None of this was. He looked tired then. Not repentant. Not broken. Just tired in the selfish way people get tired when their management of reality stops working. I never meant to hurt you like this, he said. And that more than almost anything else was what ended whatever was left. Because it was such a small sentence for such a large betrayal. Like pain only counted if properly intended. Like a man could walk another woman step by step towards my front room call, my marriage complicated test, my address in draft after draft, and still imagine himself morally softened because he never filled out the final line. I stood up. My grandmother used to say the quickest way to understand a person is to watch what they treat as available when it isn't theirs, I said. You treated my stability like available material. That is what you did. Not because you loved her so much, because you loved your own options more than my peace. He did not argue with that. Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because some part of him finally heard himself clearly enough to know argument would only make him smaller. I moved the original house papers this afternoon, I said. You won't have access to them again. I also changed the account passwords tied to the property and the insurance login. You can collect your personal things tonight or tomorrow, but you are not staying here while you decide how misunderstood you want to be. He stared at me for a long second. You're throwing away a marriage. No, I said. I'm refusing to stand inside it while you redraw the walls. He left the next morning, not with drama. 2 duffel bags, a garment bag, his shaving kit, the coffee mug his sister bought him 3 Christmases ago with some dumb joke about blueprints on it. I stood in the hallway while he carried things past me and felt sick in the plain human way endings make you sick even when they are right. After the door closed, I locked it. Then I stood there with my hand still on the knob looking at the hallway my grandmother had once painted herself because she said contractors rushed corners they did not love. The house sounded different without Owen in it. Quieter, obviously, but not empty. More like it had stopped bracing. That first weekend alone, I cried once at the kitchen sink while washing a plate neither of us had even liked very much. I cried again when I found one of his socks under the bed. Relief is not tidy, neither is grief. Doing the right thing does not spare you from mourning the version of the future you had built before the facts arrived. On Sunday afternoon, I opened the lockbox letter again and carried it to the porch. This house is a roof, not a favor. Stand up straight in it. I sat on the top step with the note in my lap and my bare feet on the warm brick. Across the street, somebody's little boy was learning to ride a bike, wobbling hard and shouting every time he made it 3 feet without tipping. The dog next door barked twice and then settled. Somewhere nearby, somebody was grilling onions. The porch still leaned a little left. The screen door still clicked before it shut. The brass hook by the pantry still held my keys and nobody else's. The house did feel different now. Not untouched, not innocent. I do not think places stay innocent after certain truths come out in them. But the difference was no longer threat, it was knowledge. I folded my grandmother's note and pressed it flat against my palm for a moment before tucking it back into the envelope. Then I reached up, touched the front door frame the way I always had when I came home, and for the first time in weeks the gesture did not feel like asking, it felt like answer.